It was late afternoon, the kind of grey that doesn't threaten rain, just lingers, quiet and undecided. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had taken a different route, looking for something I couldn't name. There she was, sitting on a worn-out bench with a coffee cup balanced between her hands, steam long gone. Her shoulders were hunched forward, eyes fixed on something far beyond the trees. I almost walked past her. Almost. She didn't look at me when she spoke. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, like she'd said it 100 times in her head but never out loud. "No one falls in love with a body like mine," she said. I stopped walking. That kind of sentence doesn't belong to silence. It asks for a witness, even if it wasn't meant for one. I didn't answer right away. I sat down at the far edge of the bench, leaving a careful space between us. I didn't want to crowd her truth. We just sat there, the wind pushing around dried leaves and the city humming softly behind us. Then I asked, "If you let me, I will fall in love." She turned slowly, eyes narrowed, not defensive, just tired. There was no disbelief in her face, more like caution dressed as curiosity. "Why would you say something like that?" she asked. I shrugged, not to be evasive, just because the answer felt too large to contain. "Because you said it like it was final." "And I don't believe it is," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You don't know me." "Not yet." The silence after that wasn't heavy. It was careful, like we were both trying not to step on something fragile between us. She leaned back a little, her hands still wrapped around the empty cup like it was something warm. "My name's Natalie," she said. "Ryan." We didn't shake hands. It would have felt too formal for something so strangely intimate. She told me little things, like how she comes to that bench when she feels invisible, that she works at a bookstore nearby and always takes her break late so she won't run into anyone, that people don't say cruel things to her face, they just say nothing at all, that the silence is louder than the insults ever were. I told her I liked bookstores, that I didn't believe silence was neutral, that sometimes it hides what people are too afraid to confront in themselves. She nodded, like that made some sense. When she stood to leave, she didn't look at me directly. "You don't have to pretend. I'm not asking for attention. I'm not giving it," I said. "I'm offering it." She paused, as if weighing the difference between the two. Then she walked away, and I didn't follow. I stayed on that bench, listening to the leaves whisper under her footsteps, and realized that something small had cracked open inside me. Not attraction. Not longing, something quieter, like recognition. And I knew I'd come back to that bench again. 2 days passed before I saw her again. Same bench, same time. But this time, she looked up when I approached, as if she'd expected me, though she didn't say that. I didn't ask if I could sit, I just did. A quiet agreement already hung between us, shaped from that first conversation. She held another coffee cup, but it was full this time. I noticed her fingers trembling slightly around the lid. Though the rest of her was still, I offered her a gentle nod, and she returned it like we were old friends who didn't need words to fill space. "Rough day?" I asked. She gave a dry laugh. "I work in a bookstore. It's hard for anything to be dramatic when your biggest problem is someone putting poetry in the mystery section." "That does sound like a tragedy," I said. She smiled at that, this time with a flicker of warmth behind it. "Maybe not a tragedy, more like a quiet offense." "Do you want to get out of the cold?" I asked, nodding toward the corner cafe. I wasn't trying to rescue her, just shift the air a little. She hesitated. I watched her weigh it, her solitude, her history, her fear. Then she stood. "All right, just coffee." The cafe was almost empty, humming with low conversations and the soft clink of ceramic. We chose a table by the window, sat across from each other, and for a while we just existed. Not in performance, not in pretense, just two people with warm drinks and no need to impress. Natalie spoke first. "People think being invisible is about others not seeing you, but it's worse when you start believing it too, when you stop looking at mirrors, stop expecting to be remembered." I didn't respond with sympathy. I offered honesty. "I saw you before you spoke. I remember what you were wearing, how your fingers held that cup like it meant something. You weren't invisible to me." Her eyes lingered on mine for a beat too long, like she didn't trust the stillness between us yet. Then she looked away and took a sip of her coffee as if to hide how much she needed that sentence. I told her about my work. Boring, unremarkable. She seemed to like that I wasn't trying to be fascinating, that I wasn't trying at all. We spoke of books and how neither of us ever finished the ones we started. She said she liked beginnings too much. I said I liked what came after the middle, when things got complicated. She looked at me then. "Why are you being so kind?" "I'm not sure I'd call it kindness," I said. "Just presence." We stayed there longer than either of us intended. When she checked her phone, her eyes widened. "I have to go." I didn't try to stop her, just nodded. But before she left, she turned and asked, "Same bench tomorrow?" I nodded again. She didn't wait for my answer. She walked out with a purpose I hadn't seen before, and I realized something as I sat there alone. We hadn't touched, we hadn't flirted, we hadn't made any promises, but something was starting, and slow and patient, like the moment just before dawn, when the dark finally softens, and you know light is coming, you just don't know what it will reveal. She didn't show up the next day, or the day after. I went to the bench anyway, sat in the same spot, let the hours stretch quietly, without expectation. I wasn't waiting. I was being available, in case she needed someone to be. On the third day, just when I had started to stand, I heard her voice behind me. "You're persistent." I turned. She was holding a small paper bag, eyes shaded by the late sun. "You hungry?" she asked, offering it without ceremony. We sat and shared a sandwich, halves uneven, like she'd taken a bite out of one before deciding to find me. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't need to. Some silences aren't meant to be broken by questions. After a few bites, she said, "My mum used to say that loneliness is just a habit, like coffee in the morning, or biting your nails. She said if you do it long enough, it starts to feel like a part of who you are." "Do you believe that?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "I think it's worse. I think loneliness is something you carry even when you're with people, especially then." I didn't try to argue. Instead, I said, "There's a difference between being alone and being unseen. One is a choice." She looked at me like I'd said something she didn't know she needed to hear. Then she exhaled, the sound half relief, half surrender. "I was engaged once," she said suddenly, 3 years ago. He said he loved how confident I was, but I think what he meant was he loved that I acted like I didn't need anything, including him." I stayed quiet. She wasn't looking for comfort, just the space to say it out loud. "He ended it without a real reason," she continued. "Said he wasn't ready, said it wasn't me. You know that line?" "Too well," I said. She glanced at me, amused and cautious. "You too. A long time ago. She said I was too stable, that she needed someone with chaos." Natalie laughed, and this time it was real. "What a ridiculous thing to say." "She meant it," I said. "Some people don't know how to stand still, so when they meet someone who does, they feel like they're drowning. Maybe she wanted to be rescued. Maybe I didn't offer the kind of rescue she imagined." Natalie leaned back, stretching her legs out in front of her. "Do you think there's someone for everyone?" I thought for a moment. "I think there are people who recognize each other. Maybe not because they're the same, but because they understand what the other is surviving." She nodded slowly. "I don't let people see the bad days. I've always been the one who makes others laugh, even when I'm falling apart." "Who sees you when you're not performing?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "No one." "That's the point." I let that settle between us. Then I said, "I'd like to, if you ever decide to let someone." She didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. We sat there until the light changed, until the world softened into shadows, and neither of us needed to say more. There was something in the quiet, a weight shared, not lifted, a truth finally spoken and met with something stronger than pity. Presence. The next Saturday, I invited her to a book fair at a park on the other side of town. I didn't make it a big gesture. No pressure, no insistence, just a simple question in a message I typed and retyped before sending, "There's a book fair this weekend. I thought of you. No expectations, just company." She didn't respond until the next morning. "If I come, it's because I want to." "Not because you made it sound easy," I replied, "or that's the best reason." She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a dark green sweater that looked too warm for the day, but she didn't seem to care. I noticed she had a small tote bag slung over her shoulder. the corner of a notebook peeking out. I didn't comment on it. I just smiled and said, "I'm glad you're here." We walked in silence at first, weaving between stands filled with second-hand books and handmade bookmarks. The air smelled like dust and ink, with the occasional burst of coffee from a vendor nearby. She stopped at a table of old paperbacks and picked one up without looking at me. "Used books make me nervous," she said. "Why?" "They've already been held, dog-eared, abandoned. Feels like reading someone else's disappointment. Or their favorite part," I offered. "Depends on what kind of reader you are." She looked at me then, not smiling, but something softer. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Turn something sharp into something gentle." "I don't mean to," I said. "It's just how I see things." We kept walking. She paused often, not to buy, just to browse. At one point, she handed me a copy of a book I'd mentioned in passing during our first coffee. I was surprised she remembered. "I thought you said you didn't finish books," I said. "I don't, but I remember the ones people care about." We sat on a low stone wall near the edge of the fair, both holding paper cups, watching a kid chase pigeons across the grass. She pulled her sweater sleeves over her hands. "Do you ever feel like you're always waiting to be told you're too much?" she asked, not looking at me. "Sometimes," I said, "but I've learned not to ask questions I don't want answered." She nodded slowly, eyes still on the kid in the grass. "People always want me to shrink, physically, emotionally, conversationally. Like if I just took up less space, I'd be easier to love." "Maybe it's not about being easy to love," I said. "Maybe it's about being impossible to ignore." She turned to me, quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Why do you keep showing up?" "Because I want to, and because you haven't asked me not to." She considered that, then pulled her notebook out of the tote. She tore out a page and handed it to me. It was a sketch, rough, unfinished, just a few pencil lines, but it was of me, sitting on the bench. I remembered the shirt, the angle of my jaw. It was accurate in a way a photo never could be. "I don't usually show my drawings to people," she said. "Then I won't say anything about it," I replied. "Just, thank you." She tucked the notebook away again, her hands slightly trembling. "I'm not good at letting people close," she said. "I don't want to owe anyone my softness." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "But if you offer it, I'll treat it like it's something sacred." She didn't speak again. We sat until the sky began to cool and the crowd thinned. When we stood, she didn't ask if I'd walk her home, and I didn't offer. But at the crosswalk, she touched my arm gently and said, "Today was mine. I chose it." And that meant more than anything else she could have said. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen, but there was no message, just a call. I answered without hesitation. "Can you come over?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I don't want to talk. I just don't want to be alone." I didn't ask questions. I didn't offer reassurances. I just said, "I'm on my way." When she opened the door, she was wearing an oversized t-shirt and had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. Her hair was unbrushed, her eyes swollen. She stepped aside silently and let me in. The apartment smelled faintly of chamomile tea and something burnt. I noticed a mug on the table, half drunk, and a candle that had drowned itself in wax. The lights were dim. She didn't say a word. She just sat on the couch, pulled her knees to her chest, and stared at a blank TV screen. I sat beside her, careful not to let my presence feel like intrusion. I didn't try to touch her. I didn't fill the space with words. I just let the silence settle. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time bent differently in that quiet. Eventually, she spoke, barely above a whisper. "It's nothing dramatic. I just got tired of pretending I'm fine, of being strong all the time. It's exhausting." "You don't have to be strong right now," I said. She nodded, like she already knew but needed someone else to say it. "I didn't want to cry in front of anyone," she admitted. "But tonight it just cracked, and I didn't want to explain myself." "You don't have to." She shifted, not closer, but less guarded. Her shoulder almost brushed mine. "There's this voice in my head," she said, "telling me I should have done more, been better, looked different, acted different. Maybe if I had, people would have stayed." I let that sit. Then I said, "People who leave are rarely responding to who we are. They're responding to what they can't face in themselves." She looked at me, really looked, Why do you talk like that, like you're not afraid of anything? I'm afraid of a lot, I said, but not of showing up. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly, annoyed at herself. I hate that I'm like this. You're not like this. You're feeling something. That's human. She didn't argue. She leaned her head back, eyes closed, breathing deep like she'd been underwater and finally surfaced. Do you mind if I just rest here? She asked, already curling toward the cushion. Not at all. I stayed seated, feet flat on the ground, hands on my lap. She fell asleep slowly, and I felt the rhythm of her breathing change. There was something sacred about that moment, about being allowed into someone's silence, not to fix it, not to fill it, but to witness it without flinching. I sat with her like that for hours, the room dark and still, the only sound her breath and the occasional creak of settling walls. When I left just before dawn, I didn't wake her. I wrote a note instead, folded it neatly, and left it by her mug. You don't have to speak to be heard. Then I closed the door quietly behind me and walked into the cold morning, knowing something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but entirely. She called me on a Sunday afternoon. Her voice was strained, clipped at the edges. I need to try on a dress for a wedding. I don't want to go alone. There was no hesitation in my response. I'll be there in 20. When I arrived, she didn't greet me with her usual dry humor. She simply let me in and led me to her bedroom, where 3 dresses were laid out on the bed, one still with tags, one wrinkled, and one folded so neatly it looked untouched. She hovered over them like they were weapons instead of fabric. She didn't speak, just picked the one with the tags and disappeared into the bathroom. I waited, seated on the edge of the bed, staring at a framed photo on her nightstand, her as a child, missing a front tooth, holding a dog too big for her arms. There was a joy in her face I hadn't seen yet, or maybe I had, hidden beneath all her armor. When the door creaked open, she stood there, arms stiff at her sides, eyes fixed on the floor. The dress was emerald green, soft around her shoulders, fitted at the waist. It wasn't wrong, but her face said otherwise. She turned toward the mirror and froze. Her breath caught. Then came the quiet unraveling. I look ridiculous, she whispered. Like someone stuffed me into a dress meant for a smaller life. I stood but didn't approach. You don't. I do, she said. Don't lie. I'm not. She faced the mirror again, her expression folding in on itself. Everyone will stare. They'll wonder why I bothered, why someone like me tries. I stepped closer, slow, deliberate. I didn't touch her reflection or her body, just stood beside her so she wouldn't be alone in that cruel light. They'll stare, I said, because you're there, because you didn't shrink, because you chose to show up anyway. She shook her head. You don't get it. I don't, I admitted. But I see you, and I see how hard this is. And I swear to you, Natalie, there is not a single thing you need to change to be worth showing up for. Her lip trembled, and she pressed her fist against it like she could keep the emotion in by force. You don't have to do this, she murmured. Say things just to make me feel better. I'm not saying them for you, I said. I'm saying them because they're true, and you've gone too long without hearing the truth. She looked at me then, fully. No sarcasm, no shield. Just eyes brimming, trying not to spill, and for the first time I felt her let me in. I used to love dressing up, she said, voice barely there. When I was a kid, before the world taught me to be ashamed of wanting to be seen. Then maybe, I said, it's time to take that part of you back. She didn't answer, just nodded, a single, slow motion. Then she turned from the mirror, pulled the dress off carefully, and folded it back onto the bed. No decision was made that day about what to wear, but something else shifted, something deeper than fabric. She sat beside me, quiet. I stayed, not as a witness to her pain, but as a participant in her return to herself. We said nothing for the rest of the afternoon. But in that silence, something profound was spoken and heard. She came over on a Thursday evening with a paper bag clutched in both arms like it might fall apart if she let go too soon. I thought we could cook something, she said, not meeting my eyes. I stepped aside and let her in. I liked the sound of that. We moved around my small kitchen without much instruction. She unpacked the groceries, pasta, garlic, fresh tomatoes, a wedge of parmesan. and placed them on the counter like pieces of a small plan she'd carefully thought through. She handed me the knife with a smirk. "You're on chopping duty. Try not to make them cry." I make no promises. The rhythm we fell into was slow but steady. She moved with a kind of hesitant grace, like someone who had learned to stay out of the way for too long. I made sure there was no way to misread my pace. Deliberate to relaxed, no rush to finish. This wasn't about the food. She stirred the sauce while I grated cheese. There was a moment where her hand brushed mine as we reached for the same spoon, and she pulled away quickly, muttering, "Sorry." "You don't have to apologize for being close," I said. "I wasn't always like this," she replied, not looking at me. Touch didn't used to feel like a question. We stood in silence for a beat, the bubbling of the sauce filling the room. "You still don't owe it to anyone," I said, "even if you used to give it freely." She nodded once, almost to herself. When the pasta was ready, we sat on the floor with our plates, leaning against the cabinets like two people who had run out of chairs or maybe just preferred the ground. She laughed at something I said about overcooked noodles, and a bit of sauce landed on her shirt. She looked down, sighed, then laughed again. Really laughed. "I'm a disaster," she said, wiping at the stain. "So you're a person," I corrected. "Big difference." She grew quiet, the smile lingering at the corners of her mouth. "I can't remember the last time I did this, just shared a space with someone, ate a meal without performing. I didn't come for a show." She looked at me then, like she wanted to believe it. "You really don't expect anything, do you?" "I expect you to be exactly as you are. Nothing more." She reached for her glass of water, took a slow sip, then said, "I'm waiting for the moment this all changes, when you realize I'm not worth the effort, that I take up too much room, need too much reassurance, feel too much all the time. That's not your burden to carry alone," I said. "I choose to be here. That's not a favor, it's a decision." Her throat moved as she swallowed hard. "You make it sound easy. It's not easy. It's just real." We didn't clean the dishes right away. Instead, we talked about things that didn't matter and things that did. She told me about the stray cat that followed her home last year, how she named it but never let it inside. "I was afraid it would stay," she said, "and I wasn't sure I could handle being needed." I told her I understood that too well, how sometimes the idea of belonging felt heavier than solitude, but that sometimes what feels heavy is actually what grounds you. By the time we stood to clean up, something unspoken had settled between us. Not romance, not yet, but trust, maybe, or the earliest thread of it. Before she left, she looked at the stack of clean plates and then at me. "You're not like the others." I didn't ask who the others were. I just said, "Neither are you." And for once, she didn't argue. It was a quiet Tuesday when she called. Not to talk, just to ask if I was home. Her voice was clipped, flat, the tone people use when they're holding something in their chest and haven't decided whether to bury it or let it burn. I told her the door was open. 20 minutes later, she was sitting on my couch, arms folded tightly, eyes on the floor. She didn't explain right away, just pulled her phone from her pocket, unlocked it, and handed it to me. A message thread was open. The name at the top was one I hadn't heard before, but I didn't ask. I read the last few texts, short, careless things, the kind of messages that pretend to be harmless but leave bruises anyway. "Saw your post. You look brave. Didn't expect you to show your face like that. Still think about what we had. Not sure why." Natalie didn't say a word. Just waited, jaw tight. I handed the phone back gently. "You don't have to explain it," I said. "I wasn't going to," she replied, her voice brittle. "I just needed someone to see it, so I know I'm not crazy." "You're not?" She exhaled, a slow release that didn't ease anything. "He used to say he liked that I wasn't like other women," she said. "That I was real, like that was some kind of prize. And then, the second I wanted more than attention, he vanished. Now he shows up whenever he feels like it. Like I'm some backup plan." I didn't speak. Not yet. She needed to say it all. "I spent so long believing I was lucky someone wanted me," she whispered. "Even when he made me feel small, even when I knew better, I still answered, I still hoped." "It's hard to unlearn hope," I said. She laughed bitterly. "Hope gets dressed up as forgiveness, doesn't it, as patience, as love. And by the time you realize it's just loneliness in disguise, It's too late. You're already attached. She leaned back, resting her head against the cushion, staring at the ceiling. I didn't reply this time, she added. I wanted to, but I didn't. And then I felt pathetic for needing to tell someone I didn't. I looked at her for a long moment. Telling someone isn't weakness. It's evidence that you made a choice, that it mattered. She turned her head toward me. Why are you like this? Like what? Safe, consistent, uncomplicated. I'm not uncomplicated, I said. I just don't need to create chaos to feel real. She blinked, slowly. Do you ever wonder if people like me are too messy for people like you? No, I said, but I wonder if people like me are too quiet for people who've only known noise. We sat in silence then, not avoidance, just space to let things settle. Eventually, she stood and walked to the window, arms still crossed. You don't try to fix me. I wouldn't know how, I said. That's why I trust you, she whispered. When she turned back, her eyes were red but dry. She walked over, sat beside me again, this time closer. Her hand brushed mine, not tentative this time, just present. I don't know what we're doing, she said. We don't have to name it, I replied. We just keep showing up. And that night, that's exactly what we did. We showed up, we stayed, and we said nothing that needed defending. My birthday came quietly, the way I preferred it. No grand celebrations, no loud invitations. I'd told a few friends, made loose plans for a small gathering in my apartment, just enough people to fill the space without overwhelming it. I didn't expect Natalie to come. I hadn't even invited her in the traditional sense. I only said days earlier, there'll be cake if you feel like dropping by. She hadn't answered, only nodded, the kind of non-committal gesture people use when they're still deciding if they're allowed to belong. The doorbell rang 40 minutes into the evening. A few of my co-workers were already there, talking over the music. I opened the door, and there she was, hair pulled back, wearing a deep blue sweater, holding a small potted plant with a ribbon tied loosely around it. "Happy birthday," she said, almost shyly. I stepped aside, heart slowing. "Come in." She didn't hover near the food or make conversation with strangers. She stood near the edge of the room, watching everything like it might disappear if she blinked too fast. I walked over, handed her a glass of water and said, "You came. You sounded like someone who wouldn't make it a big deal if I didn't." "I wouldn't," I said, "but I'm glad you did." We talked in the kitchen, away from the others. I told her stories about childhood birthdays, how I once cried because my cake collapsed, how my mother used to let me choose the dinner, even if it meant cereal and toast. She listened, really listened, and then she said something I didn't expect. "No one's ever asked me to blow out candles with them." It was quiet for a moment. Then I reached for the cake, simple, white frosting, no frills, and lit a single candle. "Then let's fix that," I said. She looked at me, startled. "You're serious?" "Completely." I carried the cake to the table and gestured for her to stand beside me. The others quieted, watching without interfering. It was just a candle, just a small flame. But it felt like something more. I didn't make a speech. I didn't draw attention to it. I just waited. When she leaned in with me and blew out the candle, the silence was thick with something sacred. We didn't make a wish aloud, but I think we both did quietly in that shared breath. Later, after people had gone and plates had been cleared, we sat on the floor again, backs against the couch. The potted plant she'd brought sat between us. "I wasn't sure what to get you," she said. "You didn't have to get anything. I wanted to bring something that lasts." I nodded. "It's perfect." She stared at the plant, then at me. "Was it strange, sharing your moment with someone who hasn't earned it?" I shook my head. "You don't have to earn belonging. Sometimes someone just chooses you." Her eyes shimmered. Not tears, but something near them. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything," I said. "Just stay." And she did. That night, she didn't rush to leave. She helped wash the dishes. She dried them slowly. And when the room was quiet again, she sat beside me. Not as a guest, not as someone passing through, but as something else entirely. Not a promise, not a confession, a presence. One that felt, for the first time, permanent. The seasons shifted slowly. Leaves gathered in corners of the streets, then vanished with the wind. The air thinned, turned sharper. But we kept walking, Natalie and I, most often without direction, without any destination in mind. It became a habit, a quiet ritual, a kind of language we spoke through footsteps and shared glances. One evening, as the city folded into itself under the weight of twilight, we found ourselves by the same bench where we'd first met. She hesitated before sitting, as if the memory might rise and swallow her whole. "It feels smaller now," she said softly. "You're just standing taller," I replied. She didn't argue. We sat in silence for a long time, her hands buried in her coat sleeves, mine resting on my knees. Every so often, I'd glance over, not to read her but to anchor myself. She broke the silence first. "I keep expecting it to fall apart. Whatever we are, we're not made of glass, but we're not wrapped in guarantees either," she whispered. "I don't think love ever is." She looked at me, her eyes not fearful now but searching. "Is that what this is?" I didn't answer right away. I watched a pair of birds scatter from a nearby branch, startled by something unseen. "I think love doesn't always arrive with clarity," I said. "Sometimes it comes slowly, like water shaping stone. You don't notice until the edges are smooth." She nodded once. "I don't need declarations. I know. I just need—" She paused. "To not be left when I'm quiet, when I'm not impressive, when I'm tired of trying. You could be all silence, and I'd still stay." That did something to her face, softened it, opened it, not in gratitude, but in understanding. "I used to believe I had to earn this," she said, "that love was a reward for effort, discipline, disappearing in all the right ways. You were taught wrong." "I know," she said, "but sometimes I still feel like I'm apologizing just for existing. You're not a burden." She leaned her head against my shoulder, then just the weight of it. No words, no warning. It wasn't tentative, it was natural. Like her body had finally trusted gravity around me. We stayed like that as the streetlights blinked on. The world kept moving, but we didn't. There was no need to. Eventually, she said, "You don't make me feel safe because you fix things. You make me feel safe because you don't flinch when I'm not okay." "I'll never flinch," I said. We didn't say goodbye that night. We didn't part with promises or define what had taken root between us. But when we stood and walked, her hand found mine, and she held it like she meant it, not like a test, not like a need, but like a choice. That was enough. And maybe that's what love actually is. Not a vow shouted into the world, but the quiet certainty that you'll keep showing up, even when no one asks, even when nothing dramatic happens, even when it would be easier to retreat. Especially then.